Welcome everyone. I'm Lauren Summers. I'm Senior Director of Lifelong Learning and Travel at the Yale Alumni Association. I manage the Yale Alumni Academy program. And Yale Alumni Academy is all about bringing the research, scholarship, and expertise of Yale's faculty to the alumni community for substantive learning experiences like the one that we're about to have today with Professor Craig Wright. Craig Wright is Moses Professor Emeritus of Music. He holds an MA, a PhD from Harvard, and has taught at Yale for more than 45 years. He continues to offer at Yale annually the Genius course as part of Yale's summer program. During his tenure at Yale, Craig served as chair of the Department of Music from 1986 to 1992, academic director of online education from 2014 to 2017, and he's published 7 books on music and cultural history, the most recent being The Hidden Habits of Genius with HarperCollins. It was an Amazon Top 20 book selection for 2020. It's the subject of our presentation today. And if you enjoy today's presentation, if you've had any teaching, learning experience with Professor Craig Wright, we do invite you to check out his summer immersion course that he's offering with Yale Alumni Academy, and we'll share more information about that in the chat window for you. Professor Craig Wright is an excellent teacher, and that's not me saying that. That's 2 prestigious prizes that he has received from Yale on teaching, the Sewell Prize and the Devane Medal. He was also awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship and honorary doctorate from the University of Chicago. And in 2010, he was elected a member of the Academy of Arts and Sciences. Professor Craig Wright, welcome. Delighted to have you here today, and I will turn it over to you for the presentation.
Well, thank you, Lauren. That's a lovely introduction, probably longer than it needed to be. And I want to thank Anthony Hannon. You're only as good as the people that are helping you out with technology, and Rhoda Lee, who also has helped me out in a number of ways with alumni travel for years and years and years. And particularly thanks to you for joining with us today. So what I'm going to do now is show you that I'm no genius, and I'm going to try to turn this over to a PowerPoint share here and see how it looks. So Anthony, are we doing okay there? Everybody seeing what we should be seeing on the screen, just that opening slide?
We see it, yep.
Okay, so I think we're good to go. I made the first step, at least into the Genius Hall of Fame. Let's see if I can make this second. So here we've got the agenda for today. What are we going to be doing today? Just a word or two about what caused this book to be written, what genius is not, and perhaps what it is, 6 habits of genius that we might all follow, habits we'll be talking about today, and how this can perhaps change our lives. So here we go. Part 1, a word about me. I'm no genius. I was reminded of this when I told my then young adult children, we have 4 children, that I was going to be teaching a course on genius at Yale. Well, they thought that was the funniest darn thing they had ever heard. You're no genius, you're a plotter, one of them said, and they were right. But sometimes if you stand outside of a process or something and look in, you can see those, see better than those are actually inside doing it. My own background, as Lauren alluded to, was in music. I wanted to be the next Van Cliburn. I had everything going for me. My parents were very supportive. We came from a middle-class household. They were very supportive. They put a nice Baldwin grant ultimately at my disposal, gave me the best teachers, sent me off to the Eastman School of Music. I practiced the requisite. We now read 10,000 hours, indeed 15,000 hours by my count. I had everything going for me except one thing. I had actually very little musical talent, and that was a problem in music. No perfect pitch, no extraordinary musical memory, no special hand-eye coordination to get me to a particular spot on the keyboard. So the mantra around the schools of music were, if you can't compose, you perform. If you can't perform, you teach. Off I went to become a teacher, musicologist, studied at Harvard, and then was fortunate enough, and it was just wonderful those years, and still continue teaching the 3 B's of classical music at Yale. But the most interesting person I ran into when I was there was actually an M, a Mozart, particularly after 1983, when that wonderful, wonderful movie, I'm sure many of you have seen it, Amadeus, came out. Could this be possible? Was there really somebody like that? So I started reading the Mozart letters, all 1,200 of them, and started going around to the world to Berlin and Krakow and Vienna and Salzburg and Paris. Yes, a lot in Paris, and to New York. There's a lot in the Morgan Gallery, Morgan Library in New York City, looking at autographed manuscripts, trying to get my head inside of Mozart's head as much as possible. After that, I started looking at sketches of Leonardo da Vinci, started reading. I wasn't up to par with the sciences, so I had to use secondary sources, biographies for people like Einstein. At the same time, as mentioned, married 4 children, now 7 grandchildren. I would watch all of this unfold, watch these children develop. How does this happen? Why is this person able to do that, but not this? When does this develop in that particular point of this child's life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this came ultimately fed into this book. I began when my HarperCollins was kind enough to take on this project. They wanted me to formulate these takeaways, how this will change your life. I thought it was something of a scam. I was more interested in the personalities, but the more I read, I came to realize that there really are commonalities in the lives of all of these geniuses, things that they all had together, and perhaps there are some things that we can take away from this, some common habits. Okay, enough about the book itself. So let me try to explain what I have learned in my study of genius. The first thing I learned that many of the prejudices or predispositions I had about genius were all wrong. So, whoops, here we go. Part 2, surprise number 1. Genius is not a sudden calculation, but an impactful innovation that occurs after laborious preparation. Even if it seems like a sudden aha moment, it's something you may subconsciously have been thinking about for a very long period of time. Remember, it took Darwin 5 years to sail around the world. It took Einstein 7 years to finally formulate his theory of general relativity. Why then in the movies such as Rain Man or Beautiful Mind do we get these aha moments? Well, we don't have 5 years to sit there or 7 years to sit there. We got 2 hours to get in and get out. So that's why it happens with this slap the forehead, the genius has it idea. That's really not the way it happens. Surprise number 2, genius is not about playing the game well. It's not about facility. That turns out to be mostly celebrity. Not about playing the game well, but about inventing a new game we'll call innovation. So we've got a little fun video queued up here for us. On the left, we'll see in a second, the world reigning chess champion, Magnus Carlsen, and he'll be playing our mystery guest. As you can see by the clock there, they're playing speed chess. Our world champion, of course, has an advantage, so he's given only 30 seconds to make all of his moves, whereas our mystery guest has 2 minutes. So let's see if we can get this to go here.
Go?
Yes, absolutely.
So we should, start the clock. Oops. What are you supposed to do when he does that? This is getting messy already.
Okay, he castles.
Really? Getting a lot of strength there. Oh, Oh, that was quick. Oh, that was bad.
But the question is, so who's the real genius here? I don't know of any Carlson openings. I don't know of any Carlson defenses. He's just very good playing games that people have been playing for millennia. When I write up the text for something like this, I use a Microsoft word system. What you're seeing today is developed on another game changer of Bill Gates, the PowerPoint presentation. So this surprise number 2 led me to think of what genius really is. And I formulate, and this is what I try to have the students in the Yale class come to. I don't tell them this. I have them wrestle with this for 2 weeks, perhaps, and nudge them in this direction. A genius may be a person of extraordinary mental powers whose creative works and insights change society, change in some significant way for good or ill across time and across culture. After I wrote this book, it occurred to me that's a very long-winded way of doing this, and nobody will ever remember that. Maybe there's a simpler way, a mathematical way here, kind of a formula. G equals S times N times D. Genius equals the greatest significance. What the heck is significance? Well, that could be many things. A new tennis shoe or a vaccine against COVID. Of significance for the greatest number, well, that's quantifiable over the longest duration, and that's quantifiable too. Maybe this is too much a materialistic definition. And at this point, when teaching class, I would engage the students. What do you think about this? Do you agree with this? I'd actually give more points to people that would disagree, particularly if they could come up with any kind of argument, and a good argument would be even better, as to why my thesis here is incorrect. So this is just one person's idea. Surprise number 3, genius is not absolute, but is relative to time, place, culture. These are things I'm trying to explore with the students and get them to this point by thinking about the issues, not trying to insinuate any one particular answer. Well, okay, a student might say, what about the equations of someone like Einstein or Pythagoras? Or what about the music of Mozart? Well, then I would come back with, well, as I read it, there have been over human history at least 4 theories of gravity. Yeah, Mozart is thought to be timeless, but particularly in Western traditional culture. But if you are from Nigeria, you may have heard less of Mozart and heard a great deal of and think of as a genius, the inventor of Afrobeat, Fela Kuti. And the more one thinks about this, some enterprising student might say, well, the only real absolute in life is perhaps change. So if that's the case, genius may well be relative to time, place, and culture. And to get this point across, what I would then do in a class, for example, would be to say, okay, let's pretend now that we have the steps leading up to the Hall of Fame of Genius or the Pantheon of Genius. It's up to you, student, and Yale has a very diversified international student body at the moment. It's up to you to place these high to low, rank these 5 people. So they start moving around, and we would back out of the fixed PowerPoint and they could move the images around here. Well, let's say, for the sake of argument, that you're a person of color from Asia. Or a woman of color, and that is, I'm sure you know, is Frida Kahlo there on the left, of Mexican and German descent, Martin Luther King, and so on and so on. If you're a person of color and not from, say, Western Europe, this may be your ranking, but if you are from Western Europe and have a traditional education, maybe these are your go-to people in terms of priority or ranking, if we need do so in the thinking about genius. So through exercises like this, we try to get the students to think about how genius may, in fact, possibly be relative to time, place, and culture. Surprise number 4, genius is not a high IQ. And I myself was delighted to find this out. But so often we hear, she's so smart, she's a genius. Well, what the heck does it mean to be smart? What does that really mean? Genius, as we probably all would acknowledge if when we think about it, comes in many different forms. And a super high IQ is not necessarily one of them. Maybe only a good general IQ is useful. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But to get this point across, I want to show you a quick video clip of a gentleman named Chris Langen. He's still with us, and he has the honor of having achieved the highest IQ score ever recorded, supposedly 210. But at the same time, in terms of profession, in terms of impact on the world, he, for many years, worked as a bouncer in a bar and more recently as a cowhand. And I'm sure both are very honorable professions, but they're not ones that we normally associate with genius. So let's read about this world's smartest man, Chris Langen.
I was working construction during the day and I was working in a bar at night, and I happened to see a copy of Omni magazine. It said the world's most difficult IQ test. It consists of 48 problems, some of which are extremely difficult. I think, gee, that's interesting. You know, that's interesting. I always wanted to know what my IQ was. The verbal problems were all pretty easy, so I just breezed through them. I happen to have a larger than average vocabulary. The really difficult ones were some of the spatial problems and the number sequences. Actually, highly difficult.
Okay, I'm going to move on to. Let me click here.
210 seems very, very high.
Video. 210 seems very high.
It does seem that way, doesn't it? Albert Einstein was estimated at between 180 and 190. Charles Darwin is way down there in the toilet at 135.
Are you a genius?
Well, you're kind of putting me on the spot here, aren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're forcing me to either say no, in which case, it's all hype, or you're forcing me to say yes. I'll say probably yes, I am a genius by most of the criteria. The definitive criteria of genius, I think you'd have to consider me a genius, yeah.
So then the question becomes, well, what are the definitive criteria? And maybe those are the sorts of things we're here to discuss, and everybody has an equal vote here in all of this. But it's interesting to think about, say, what Einstein's IQ was. He never took an IQ test, so we're just guessing at this. It'd be interesting to know if you know approximately what your IQ is. The more I read about this, the more there seems to be reason to believe that once you have an IQ of, say, 115 or better, that's all you really need to sort of get in the game of exceptional human accomplishment. Okay, surprise number 5. A high SAT score or grades or entry into Phi Beta Kappa are not necessarily key enablers of genius. Famous underachievers in school, Picasso had to get his father to help him cheat on a 4th grade test to get him into the 5th grade. Beethoven couldn't multiply or divide. Darwin's father became so exasperated at one point, he said, "You're going to become a disgrace to your family given your academic performance." Edison said, "I didn't graduate at the head of my class, I graduated at the foot." Disney wasn't a good student. Winston Churchill, when he was at Harrow, for example, he was always bottom of his class, and it was worse because they arranged the students alphabetically, and he had to march under Spencer Churchill, not Churchill. So all of the students in the school marched across the open parade ground from the general populace. Churchill was dead last. J.K. Rowling, Jack Ma, Steve Jobs graduated high school, GPA 2.65, and so on. Einstein's father once said, well, he gets very good grades in math and in physics, but the other sorts of grades we've come to accept. So when it comes to colleges, maybe genius, maybe even colleges are overrated, and we could talk about this. But remember, of course, that Leonardo and Mozart, neither one of them had any formal education. Lincoln was very scattered, although ultimately he did get a law degree. Famous dropouts, and this is not to suggest that youngsters should be encouraged to drop out. Most dropouts simply remain dropouts. But it is interesting to keep track of those people, such as Darwin, dropped out of medical school, Tesla, Zuckerberg, Gates, Jobs, Branson, Jack Ma, Lady Gaga, Oprah Winfrey, Kanye West. And Kanye even capitalized on this financially and professionally with this album, first great album, College Dropout. So why do these people drop out? Well, we'll get to that, I think, in a moment. Surprise number 7, mentors may be overrated. I would ask all of us to think about this, and I'm still thinking about this. These are just hypotheses. Mentors teach you how to get ahead. They provide contacts for you, give advice as to how to open professional doors. They don't teach disruption. They don't teach creativity, which may be such an individual process. They basically, I think, teach the status quo. And this brings into question the difference between genius and success. What are we trying to turn out here? Are we trying to turn out geniuses who change the world, or successful people who make the world run up to the highest possible standards? Obviously, we need both. Last surprise, number 8. Geniuses always come from the middle class or the upper middle class. Now, that's a sweeping statement. And you could see if you could come up with any of those who might run against it. Even Byron, Darwin, and Churchill, who were from moneyed families, didn't enjoy themselves huge wealth. And the reason for the middle of the road here is probably obvious to everybody. With abject poverty, there is no opportunity. With extreme wealth, there is no incentive. And that holds true, I think, to a surprising degree. Okay, having suggested what genius is not and where it does not come from, how does it happen? Where does the magic happen? What are these habits of genius? Well, let's start with number 1 here. Be curious. And here we turn to famous Eleanor Roosevelt, who said, I think, at a child's birth, if a mother could ask a fairy godmother to endow it with the most useful gift, that gift should be curiosity. And along this same line, of course, we all know Jeff Bezos. His Amazon seems to be taking over the world. I read today they even can take over Thursday night football. Quote, I think it's probably a survival skill that we remain curious and like to explore. Our ancestors, who were incurious and failed to explore, probably didn't live as long as the ones who were looking over the next mountain range to see if there were more sources of food and better climates and so on and so on and so on. So that seems very sensible. But was there ever a genius who wasn't obsessively curious? These are all of the things that the gentleman in the silhouette had said about curiosity over time. My curiosity is interfering with my work, and that happens to many of us. I have no special talents. I didn't have a high IQ, didn't claim to not have a special memory. I'm only passionately curious. It's nothing short of a miracle that the modern methods of instruction have not entirely strangled the holy curiosity of inquiry. And finally, and here he may be riffing on something that Mark Twain said in the 1890s, education is that which remains after one has thrown out everything he learned in school. Well, we're not trying to discourage, again, people from going to college or going to school here. The point is that so much of what we encounter in life, we have to learn our own. Curious people are lifetime readers. Curious people are lifetime learners. Curious people are autodidacts, which caused me to think, but only after I had left Yale, strangely, although Rick Levin reminded me of it in something that he said at one point. What's the one thing that colleges never teach you? Of course, it's the one thing that we all need to know. But maybe they don't say it because it's implicit in the process. But we don't stop, and I'm guilty as anybody else. someday you won't have me here. You're going to have to learn this on your own. I'm going to teach you how to learn this on your own later on. So maybe instead of lux et veritas, we should have dici plue, te ipsum docere. Student, learn to teach thyself. One of the entrances, as you can see in the background there, to Memorial Hall. Habit number 2 to have, be passionate. Find your passion. I don't think this ever happened at a Yale commencement, but I've read the texts of other the ones that I went to, and I went to a lot of them. How many commencement speakers have enjoined follow your passion? But then at the same token, how many 21-year-olds know what their passion are? So that may be going landing on deaf ears at that point. Some people obviously do. Mozart, Picasso, Einstein knew from the age of 5 on what their life was going to be. But others, Van Gogh didn't start to paint with oils until he was 29. Gauguin was a stockbroker until he was 35. Grandma Moses, you get the point. With many people, this happens much, much later, finding your passion. Once you've found your passion, you won't retire. If you think about all of these people here, the idea of them retiring and Edison saying, I'm not going to invent anymore, or later saying, I'm not going to think anymore, same with Freud and so on, it goes. They don't retire. Geniuses are obsessive. Why are they obsessive? Because they're egocentric and because they can fix the world. They know how the world can be fixed. Which are geniuses? Are they optimists or are they pessimists? Well, here's Harvard's Mark Zuckerberg on optimism. We all have our opinions on Zuckerberg, but he seems to be on point with regard to this statement. Optimists tend to be successful and pessimists tend to be right. If you think that something is going to be terrible and is going to fail, then you're going to look for the data points that prove you right. That's what pessimists do. But if you think that something is possible, then you're going to try to find a way to make it work. Okay, fair enough. Optimist versus pessimist. Who live longer? Optimist or pessimist? Well, a Harvard BU study here, published in the prestigious National Academy of Sciences, said when individuals were compared, recent study, individuals were compared based on their initial levels of optimism, the researchers found that the most optimistic men and women demonstrate on average an 11 to 15% longer lifespan and 50 to 70% greater odds of reaching 85 years old compared to the least optimistic groups. Okay, geniuses live a long time, but is that true? Well, I don't know. I remember Groucho Marx saying all geniuses die young. Think about Mozart. He died at 35, and Gogh, I don't know, 37, something like that. Virginia Woolf was a little over 50. Sylvia Plath, Kurt Cobain, probably around 30, if I were to guess. I'd actually have to look it up. So those are the archetypes. But in point of fact, one day I asked myself, is this really true? So I made a list of the 10 greatest musical composers, classical composers, and made up my list. And then I checked it against the lists that were out there online through Google. They basically agreed, except for one case. And you add them up and divide by 10, and you get this average age for classical composers, 51 years. Well, then I did the same thing for great artists. They lived longer, 67 years. Maybe Michelangelo was skewing the numbers here. 10 greatest scientists. They lived 75 years. They lived even longer. So these are surprisingly high numbers, surprisingly high given what lifespan was back in the day. Remember, we're factoring in Leonardo and Michelangelo here back into the 15th century, and you can see what the lifespans were. It wasn't really until after antibiotics that it begins to lengthen significantly. So the takeaway here, get a passion. It will keep you alive. To be passionate, you must first be curious. And then our next important thing to do, work. You have to have a habit for work. Confucius, find a job that you will love and you will never have to work a day in your life. And that's sort of true because I can't think of a lazy genius. I can think of lazy potential people, but I can never think of lazy geniuses who actually had an impact in the world. Passion comes from the joy of doing. But it starts with, and this is something I learned from reading through materials written by and about Frida Kahlo here. And it occurred to me one day I was listening to the Bach St. Matthew Passion. I said, passion? You know, there's gorgeous music here. Why do we call it passion? Well, the crucifixion, but this notion of passion. Passion means pain, literally. And then I came across in her writings this a wonderful line here. Passion is the bridge that takes you from pain to change. So passion and hard work seem to go hand in hand. And these are just a few, and we could run through a list of 20 of these people, of what people have said about the importance of hard work in their lives. Michelangelo, if you knew how much work went into it, you wouldn't call it genius. Bill Gates, I didn't believe in weekends, I didn't believe in vacations. Dmitry Mendeleev of the periodic table. There is no talent or genius without hard work. And so on. We could go Frederick Douglass. People may not get all they work for in this world, but they must certainly work for all that they get. Elon Musk, no one ever changed the world with a 40-hour work week. But is it all hard work? Well, I worked hard and I washed out as a concert pianist, never earned a dime as a concert pianist, no matter how hard I practiced. Is it gift or is it hard work, nature or nurture? Well, here's someone who hasn't washed out. Now, here's an interesting story relevant to Yale. A year and a half ago, I was teaching the summer online version of the Genius course. An interesting kid in there. He seemed very smart, always had to write answers with it, responsive, good writer. But there was something strange about this youngster, Nathan Chen, because every time this was online and this was in real time via Zoom, but every time he zoomed in, he seemed to be speaking to us, responding to questions from a different locale. Sometimes he was in this hotel, sometimes he seemed to be in that airport. I remember Tokyo, Los Angeles, and Montreal specifically. But most of the time he seemed to be in the backseat of an Uber. So by the end of the course, I figured out what the heck is going on. This guy is the US and North American #1 ranked figure skater. So I began to press this. Now I pressed it after the course was over because I wanted info out of this young man. I wanted to find out what was going on inside of his head, but I couldn't do that while the chaos was happening because that would appear to be currying favor and perhaps impacting his grade one way or the other. So after the course was over, we began to communicate through a series of emails. As this is what this person says. He's only person ever to land 6 of these quadruple turns in an Olympic event. 6 times spinning 4 rotations before you come back to Earth. He puts most of this in this battle of nature versus nurture. Is it gifts or hard work? He comes down in a surprising way in favor of natural gifts. He said, you have to have the capacity to deal with stress. Don't get nervous. Yeah, as a pianist, you're right. Don't get nervous. You have to have the ability to course correct during a competition. How the heck do you course correct in midair? And he says, if you want to get to the 100%, the gold medal level, and he's already won an Olympic medal, you have to max out the other 20%, which is nurture. Okay, that's what he said. Then he sends me an email a couple of days later, said, I read this to my Chinese mother, and she doesn't agree with the 80% natural gift, 20% work. She thinks it's reverse. It's 20% gift and 80% hard work. So we can't quantify these sorts of enablers, passion, curiosity. We can't put specific numbers and decimal points on that. And it's up to each of us to think what the relationship is. The longer I live, I'm coming down more and more in favor of hard work. Okay, habit number 4 to have. Be the fox, not the hedgehog. What do I mean by that? it's important to know stuff. If you want to be a genius and you see something dancing around and think, oh, I could make that into a new invention, you better maybe know something about electromagnetic fields, or you've got to pay your dues to learn things deeply early on in your career. But then once you know a particular area, then it seems as if all these people, like Leonardo, the Renaissance man or the Renaissance woman, they range widely in their interests. You might not think of Mozart, for example, as doing anything but music, but believe me, and I could show you the sketches, he was deeply, deeply interested in mathematics. Oftentimes I'll start out on the fugue, and then it will go over into deep mathematical number game theory. And all of these people are extremely well read. They are polymaths. They are lifetime learners. What does this get you going 1,000 miles wide instead of perhaps 1,000 miles deep? It allows you to see things. You have information. And when you see a lot of disparate things, you can combine things. And that's what Steve Jobs says here about creativity. When you ask people how they did something, they say they just saw something. It's because after a while, they were able to connect experience they had had and synthesize new things. Okay, habit to have number 5, think opposite. Think up there on the screen, you see all those people that thought opposite. I must be cruel only to be kind, said Shakespeare. Bezos, how did he come up with Amazon? Sometimes people see the problem and the problem is really annoying them and they invent a solution. Sometimes you can work from this solution backwards, in a backwards direction. In fact, in high tech, a lot of the innovation comes from this direction. You see a new technology and there's something out there and you work backwards from a solution to get to the appropriate problem. So the solution was the internet. The problem was shopping. It's a very inefficient way of doing business. You go into this store and didn't have it, and you have to drive a half an hour to another store. Practical takeaways here. Next time you think about this, and I try to do this, when I end a PowerPoint presentation, a public presentation of any kind, wedding speech, whatever, I start at the end and think of what's going to make a good conclusion, a big bang conclusion here. When you're at a cocktail party, how to be funny. Well, as people are talking, don't say anything. Just sit there and listen and think the opposite of what they are saying. And that may cause a good bon mot to come to mind, such as reputed to come from the mouth of Winston Churchill. It's costing us a fortune to keep Gandhi in, yes, poverty. And one of my favorites from Oscar Wilde, work is the curse of, yes, the drinking class. Habit number 6 to have, relax. Well, how do you combine things? How do you think the opposite? How do you remove these barriers that compartmentalize information? How do you tap into your subconscious? Now, at this point, I'm going to move rather quickly through the slides because there's a lot to say about all of this. We could talk about all of the times that people on the screen here said that they came up with some of their best, the very best life-changing ideas, made their careers through dreams. Paul McCartney talks about this, and the song Yesterday came to him in a dream. The essential lyrics, he changed the lyrics, but the melody, shopped it around to Harrison and Lennon. They didn't claim it, said, okay, must be my own, and then he worked it out into that famous song. And he ends this particular video by saying, I have to believe in the magic of dreams, so I have to believe in the magic. Geniuses sleep with notepads. Once Albert Einstein was in Manhattan, he was staying with his friend Peter Buki. He decided not to take the train back to Princeton, but stay there overnight. Buki asked him, do you need pajamas? No, when I sleep, when I retire, I sleep as nature made me. But he did request a pen and paper. Same thing with I.M. Pei, same thing with Otto Louis, and same thing, wish I'd had this when I wrote the book I published a couple of months ago, a great quote from Jimi Hendrix on this point. And his sister says all of his lyrics and some note scratchings were done on hotel paper that was left right next to him in the bed there. He'd wake up in the night and start writing these ideas down. Autolay. I'm going to focus on him for a minute. Tells the story about he fell asleep one night, had this brilliant idea, the solution to a problem he'd been working through for 17 years. Finally came to him. He woke up, wrote it down, scribbled it down, went back to sleep, woke up the next morning, couldn't read his handwriting. Goes back to sleep. He's obsessing. Next night, he has the same dream, wakes up, doesn't write anything down this time. He races to the lab and begins the experiment. Now, the experiment had to do with transmitting this neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, into the hearts of frogs to measure and stimulate electronic impulses between cells. And from this technology gradually developed things such as the Medtronic loop recorder, Apple Watch, pacemaker, that sort of thing. Revolutionary change, though maybe some of you are wearing a pacemaker or a loop recorder. But this came to him in a dream. So the takeaway here is go to sleep. Where do you get your best ideas? So many people say in the shower in the morning. Why? Some of the possibilities are on the screen there for you. And if you don't want to take a shower or go to sleep, maybe just take a walk. Here are all the famous people who had very interesting things to say about the importance of walking and movement. Even pacing back and forth in an office is sufficient to do this. If you don't want to exercise your way to creativity, it's happened to some important people. Their best insights came to them while riding on a train. That's not quite as crazy as it sounds. Riding on a train, going to the seashore, watching the waves, listening to music, there are these repetitive pulses in the background. Relaxation of one sort or another, seashore, walking, listening to music, et cetera, functions like acetylcholine. It has the capacity to take down barriers between categories of information and allows associative linkages to occur. You can combine things. And maybe any mindless repetition of this sort can get us headed in that direction. Toni Morrison would brood thinking of ideas while mowing the lawn in Queens. George Balanchine said, when I'm ironing, that's when I do most of my work. American painter Grant Wood, and he knew what he was talking about because he came from northeastern Iowa. All the good ideas I ever had came to me while I was milking a cow. So we've talked about 6 of these habits of genius, and we're about out of time here. Curiosity, passion, hard work, self-education, polymathic thinking, contrarian thinking. Other things we could talk about if there were world enough and time, think like a child, et cetera, et cetera. If we had more time together, we could explore all of these things in far greater detail and explore the things that we have not been able to embrace today. Part 4, we can all think like a genius, make ourselves a lot more savvy, I think, in several ways. Takeaways for your children and grandchildren. Don't obsess. It's hard to do, I know. Don't obsess with those IQ scores. ERB scores, if you have grade school youngsters, SATs, ACTs, etc., GREs, MCATs, whatever. As I've said to generations of touring parents and youngsters around Yale, there are 300 great colleges in the United States that you can go to. It really doesn't matter which, in my opinion, which one you get into. Yes, there are certain advantages. You have certain advantages, Yale and Harvard, no doubt about it. But you can get a great education in a lot of these places. It really depends on what's inside the kid. So how do we get good stuff inside the kid? Maybe emphasize diversity of experience, exploration, chances to fail and rebound from that, resilience, empathy, working with other people, interpersonal skills, and self-confidence to develop leadership, that sort of thing. Things for us grown-ups to do. Take the subway. Don't always take the easy way out in Uber. You learn a lot more in a subway in Manhattan than you do in an Uber. Don't take the same vacation twice. Enroll in these TEDx courses. Enroll in Yale Alumni intensive courses, Coursera courses that Yale puts on. It's a great program there. A couple of others on the screen there. how to make yourself more creative. Always keep pen and paper with you when you get out of bed in the morning. The most productive thing you can do is not to get out of bed. Stay there and think, because that's probably when those barriers between categories are down, and you can have solutions come to you that you otherwise probably wouldn't get later in the day when you're trying to concentrate on it. Take your hands off the wheel, in a sense. You can be productive just by staying in bed. Final takeaways here: when you listen to music, don't focus on the music or the lyrics. Ditch the Fitbits when exercising. Go with the flow, feel the flow. When you're walking, don't talk. Mow the lawn, vacuum, do the ironing, and buy a cow. And I've got 2 final slides here. Finally, get a passion. Well, we've talked about that. The secret of life, said sculptor Henry Moore, is to have a task, something you devote your entire life to, bring everything to every minute of every day for the rest of your life. And the most important thing, it must be something you cannot possibly do. Something you cannot possibly do is an oxymoron. It's a paradox, which is the basis of all humor. And humor brings laughter into the world. Play relaxes us, humor relaxes us, and we have more and better insights. And thinking of that, so we all go off with more and better insights owing to oxymoronic thinking. I'm reminded, and I'll end with this quote by Oscar Levant: what the world needs is more geniuses with humility. There's so few of us left. And with that, I'm going to stop my sharing here. And if you've been able to put up that, you certainly have a lot of resilience.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Craig. What a fascinating presentation. I'm just itching myself with a couple of questions that I want to ask you, but I know that we have about 10-15 minutes for Q&A now, and there are some questions that have been posted already. If you have a question, please do put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And I want to start off with, you gave us at the end quite a few suggestions. I don't know how easy it will be for those of us who don't already have a cow to get one. But I think
well, we can all vacuum, right? And we can all iron.
vacuum.
Yeah,
Yes, we can all get a vacuum
Yeah.
from that genius Jeff Bezos, who figured out how to get us one in 2 days or less.
Yeah.
So I want to, though, go to some of the things that are accessible for us to do. Benjamin asked, how do we balance relaxing with hard work, especially during this time of high stress and burnout? Do geniuses have any concept of self-care and deliberation in their resting?
I think they do. And to go into, actually, ironically, that's my next project. My next big project is, it's going to be entitled Relax. How relaxation, in effect, can make you more creative, make you more productive, and give increase productivity, creativity, and longevity. All of those. And I think there is an interrelation between the two, and these people have figured it out. Let me just give you 2 bizarre examples. Saul Bellow and Igor Stravinsky. Now, you normally wouldn't think of those in the same breath. They would work hard. They would concentrate like crazy, and then they would go stand on their head. Go stand on their head. There's a reason for that. Victor Hugo, when he would work intensely in his studio and then go out, he was actually rusticated out to the beach by Napoleon III or something like that. He would go exercise intensely. I have found myself, and I never thought of this at the time, I get up very early in the morning, I work hard up to a particular point, and then you know what I do? I go outside and I just walk around. Now, I happen to be in Florida at the moment. I'm embarrassed. I shouldn't be embarrassed by that. I'll be back suffering with other people in a while. But from our house here in Florida, and you can see the palm trees blowing, I go outside and just walk for about 10 minutes looking at nature. I watch those palm trees. I look at those flowers. It's a kind of a perfect storm of opposites in a way. That intense relaxation allows me to concentrate even more intensely. And I think people have figured that out. You just have to allow yourself to do it. allow yourself to go outside, allow yourself perhaps to look out the window and just daydream. Don't say, I'm wasting time there. Yes, it's relaxing, but it could also be very creative.
So another question came in about the concept of biohacking. Um, I don't know if you're just from the expression on your face, whether you're familiar with that, but
What the heck?
supplements and things that you can take to enhance your mental performance. So Omar
Oh,
asked about
gosh. You know,
acetylcholine to enhance creativity.
I'm not a proponent, and I've read a fair amount about drugs and alcohol, particularly being in music, particularly having hung around with a lot of great creators, particularly talking with wonderful neuroscientists such as Charles Lim, who graduated from Yale Medical School, uh, about the impact of drugs, alcohol, and any kind of enhancers on creativity. I'm not a big fan. I try to keep I don't drink. I used to drink. I've stopped drinking about 6 years ago. I haven't had to drink alcohol since then. Don't smoke. I try to very carefully to control what I eat. I think I'm betting on the internals of myself rather than external enhancers to make me think better. But this is just one person's opinion. I'd love to hear back from those that might be thinking about these bioenhancers.
That's a subject of a whole
Right.
additional webinar, I
Well,
bet.
that's you see, this is why we have this upcoming Yale intensive course, because that's exactly the kind of thing we can go into at that time, don't you think, Lauren?
Yes, I think, thank you for reminding me to let everyone know that they can register to spend, it's about 10 sessions with you this summer where they'll get to
Right,
spend
right. It's
upwards
even
of
worse
20
than that.
hours
It's
working
12.
working through these topics, so which I think is going to be a really exciting experience. As long as you include some relaxation in the dynamic
Well,
there.
we'll have to talk to the group about that. I learn from groups. I mean, that you tell me and I'll go try it.
Yes, yes. So now here's another question that comes in from David. Wants to know if it's worth it. Are geniuses happier or less so? And I'm going to embellish that question because I noted something in your book where you talked about the living with the genius for the other people in their family and their lives, what it's like for them as well. So I wonder if you could comment on both those things.
Yeah, I think these geniuses are obsessed, and I think they're happy in their obsessions. That's a generalization about it. But if that's the case, then why are there suicides among these creative types? So that's perhaps a silly generalization. But a lot of them really seem to love what they're doing. And Edison said, work has made this an earthly paradise for me. But they are very difficult to live with because they are obsessive. And as a result, they are racing, careening ahead toward their objective. And everybody else, family, children, colleagues, are often left in effect as roadkill along the way. So it's as I say at one point in that book, don't let your son or daughter marry a genius. Because it may not end well. It's great for humanity, but those in immediate proximity to the genius, in a sense, we, the team, have to take one for the team being all of humanity.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting point to note. This is lesser discussed part
Yeah.
of.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, but now that I think of that, Lauren, just in the point of that question, I at the beginning of the genius class, I always ask, okay, how many of you want to be a genius? And about 2/3 of the class raise their hands. At the end of the course, after it's all over, I say, now how do you still want to be a genius? And only about 1/3 or maybe 1/4 of the class.
Mhm.
And they said, and one kid popped up at one point and said, it was right on point, said, they all seem like jerks. I wouldn't never want a sweet mate like that. And there's a lot to be said for that.
So if we get to, there's a few people who have sort of asked about really the nature versus nurture type of question. It's coming up repeatedly. And one person specifically zeroed in on comparing the Japanese system as it teaches innovation and creativity to the American system. I guess I would expand that out to say, including what role does self-esteem play? What role do cultural norms play? You've already
Yeah.
sort of narrowed the field to the middle class in essence, people who have both the opportunity and the motivation. So that says that there's a certain amount of nurture that plays into it. So I'm just curious if you could speak on those
Well,
points.
again, what a wonderful topic to talk with a group about, because we probably have people of a wide variety of backgrounds, Japanese, Chinese, Indian, in our mix. And at this point, what I would do as a teacher is say, okay, you tell me, let's compare. I think we generally have an idea here in the United States what the American system of it is, but let's talk about your upbringing and your relation to creativity. Now, we have here at Yale, as you probably know in the law school, Amy Chua, and she's written a famous book, A Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mommy, I think it was called, right? And what that gets into is the Far Eastern approach to education. And we don't have time here today to go through that, but it is very different from the Western approach. You mentioned just a second ago, Lauren, esteem. It tends to break down esteem. You mentioned also the Japanese experience. There's a Japanese expression, I believe it goes, the nail that sticks out the most gets hammered down the hardest.
Mm.
Well, that doesn't seem to be meshing with the growth experience, which is sort of the American approach to this. But at the same time, Japan has been very successful in terms of creativity. If you look over all of this since the Second World War, you could think about why that might be the case. You could think about Japanese universities. You could think about Japanese press, freedom of the press. You could think about the American occupation and the introduction of university systems in Japan, why Japan has been sort of off the charts in terms of winning Nobel Prizes, much more so than China. Although, I mean, just it was an embarrassment, the absence of Nobel Prizes coming out of China. But in very recent years, they've caught up a bit, but the Japanese are still way ahead of them in terms of creativity. Now, once again, I feel uncomfortable saying all that because I'm making gross generalizations. I would like to hear from people in the room who know far more about this than I.
All right, well, I think we have time for one more question. A couple of people have asked if the slides will be available after the presentation. The presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Yale Alumni Academy website. We also encourage you, obviously, to get a copy of, I have my copy of Professor Craig Wright's new book, The Hidden Habits of Genius. And we are actually inviting you all to join a group of us who will read the book together and have some discussions about it, and hopefully ask Craig if he'll give us any suggested readings that we can do along with it, especially for those who are interested in the summer immersion course with him. I think getting together and reading the book and having more conversations like this will be a great experience. So if you look out in your email boxes, you'll be getting a message from us as soon as the recording is ready with more details about that. I'm going to finish with a question from Stuart, which I think is a really interesting one. Do geniuses first find the problem that they're compelled to solve? Or do their innovations tend to be less intentional? You know, if they come here, are they coming here to Earth with a mission, or do they just sort of stumble on something that they can't let go of?
I think they gradually find the problem. It's not the solution. That's a kind of deductive process. I think geniuses are more inductive. They see a lot of different things and begin to see the connections between them, and then see how all of this fits together and say, aha, that's the problem. So that's my thinking on that it's not so much problem solving as it is problem formulation. But I'd love to talk with people. I'd love to talk with people that are entrepreneurs, inventors, scientists, to get their opinion about this. And I could also say, by way of getting close to a sign off here, if I've got an email, you don't have to wait till this summer. It's just craig.wright@yale.edu. It's been that way ever since we had emails at Yale, and I think I had one of the first. There you go, craig.wright@yale.edu. And send me an email and I'll respond, because you know what? I'll learn something. Your comments, your thoughts, your objections will cause me to think through issues, and I'm sure I'll be the better for it.
Well, on that note, I think it's a wonderful point to end on. The curiosity is what you've just described. And I love doing these sessions with faculty members like you because it just makes us more curious to learn more. So thank you for taking the time to raise these really fascinating issues with us this afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you this summer and hearing from those of you in the audience in the weeks to come who want to join us to read Professor Wright's book together. And until the next presentation from Yale Alumni Academy, thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.